look closely at what is happening in India right now. Electric vehicles are practically everywhere. Government is aggressively pushing their adoption, and major companies are investing billions of dollars into the sector. It truly feels like you're watching the future unfold in real time. But here is the uncomfortable question we need to ask. What if India's EV boom is actually being built on something we do not actually control? If that is true, it changes absolutely everything. Let's be completely clear about one thing. The EV story in India is very real. We are seeing tremendous policy support from the government. We are witnessing rising adoption rates, especially when it comes to two wheelers. And of course, we have established companies like Tata Motors or Mahindra leading the charging in the four wheeler segment. On top of all that, the core logic is sound. Running an electric vehicle is simply cheaper for the consumer. With volatile fuel prices and severe pollution becoming a daily reality, the transition makes perfect sense. So naturally, everyone believes that EVs are the next big thing. And frankly, they are not wrong. But they are not completely right either. Because when you look little deeper beneath the surface, you realize something strange is happening. India is building electric vehicles aggressively, but the most important part of the EV is not actually controlled by India. The vital component is the battery. Let's break this down simply. An EV battery requires critical minerals like lithium, cobalt, and nickel. And where do this material come from? Our lithium primarily comes from places like Chile and Australia, while cobalt is sourced from Congo. And it gets more complicated from there. Most of these raw materials are processed and turned into battery, and that too in China, with companies like CATL absolutely dominating this space. So I want you to look about this carefully. India is merely assembling EVs, but we are importing the very heart of the vehicle. This is exactly like building smartphones without controlling the microchips. And you can certainly grow your assembly volume, but you do not ultimately control your own ecosystem destiny. Now you might be asking yourself, okay, so what? Here is why it matters. If global battery prices go up, or if trade tensions suddenly arise, Indian EV companies cannot do much to protect themselves. If the supply chain is disrupted, our domestic production immediately slows down. And if China dictates the pricing, Indian companies become price takers, not price makers. And that dynamic directly and severely hits their profit margin. And we are already seeing that in the current market. Take Tata Motors, for example. Their EV sales are undoubtedly growing, but their profitability remains heavily under pressure. Why is that? It is because the cost of the battery is massive, and these companies are forced to keep their prices competitive to win the consumer. So what do you end up with? You get high top line revenue growth, but weak bottom line profitability. And this is exactly where most retail investors get trapped. Now, let's layer this problem with another harsh reality: charging infrastructure. In India right now, public charging stations are severely limited. Setting up charging points in apartment complexes is very messy and complicated process. And taking an EV on a long distance road trip is still highly inconvenient. Because of this, early adopters and EV enthusiasts are buying EVs. But achieving true mass adoption, that is entirely a different game. There is even more risk to consider. A significant part of the EV demand we see today is actively supported by government subsidies. And if these subsidies are reduced or removed, the demand may not disappear entirely, but it will certainly slow down. And at the exact same time, companies are investing heavily in building out their massive capacities and expanding their product lines. If we are not careful, we could easily end up in a situation where the supply of vehicles grows much faster than the actual consumer demand. And that imbalance inevitably leads to brutal price wars, low profit margins, and incredibly poor return on invested capital for investors. So, how would you get benefited as investor? Here is the contrarian truth that most people are completely missing. India's EV story is strong, but it is also highly fragile. And if you know how financial markets work, you know that fragile stories do not break immediately. Instead, they first attract the most capital and many retail investors, and they look their absolute best and strong right before a shock or complete collapse. So, where is the real opportunity exist and how you should be looking instead? You shouldn't just be looking at the companies making the cars or two-wheelers. You need to look at the companies building the ecosystem. Here are the 4 key sectors we should be watching. Battery localization company. Look at the companies working on cells, materials, and battery packs. Exide Industries is setting up lithium ion cell manufacturing through a joint venture. Transitioning from legacy lead acid batteries into EV player. Amar Raja Energies is building gigafactory and leaning into lithium ecosystem. Ola Electric Mobility is majorly integrated gigafactory ambitions. And further up the supply chain, you have Tata Chemicals that is focusing on lithium refining and cathodes, while Himadri Specialty Chemical is developing anode material. The key insight here is India is still in the early innings. Most players are just announcing capacity and they're not building at scale yet. Next, look at network builders, that is charging infra company. Tata Power is the current market leader, offering end-to-end ecosystem charging ecosystem. NTPC and Power Grid Corporation are pushing government-backed expansion and grid integration place. Meanwhile, legacy oil companies like Indian Oil and BPCL are actively converting their massive network of fuel stations into EV charging hubs. The key insight here is charging might look like basic infrastructure play, but it is actually a long-term annuity and ecosystem lock-in strategy. Then there is vital technology inside the vehicles and chargers, that is power electronic components. Look at companies like ABB India and Siemens India, who provide essential EV motors, drivers, and smart mobility solutions. CG Power and Bharat Electronics also have significant exposure here, alongside early stage chip designing companies like Mass Chip Technologies. The key insight here is This is where high margins and deep technological moats can emerge. Yet it remains very under-tracked by retail investors. Then comes the grid ecosystem. So the EV adoption is as EV adoption truly scales, the load on our electric grid is going to be massive, and this requires massive capital expenditure, more transmission lines, and more balancing infra from companies like Power Grid, NTPC, Adani Energy, and Tata Power. The key insight is upgrading the grid is a massive second order compounding opportunity. Let me leave you with final thought. Most people are chasing surface level narratives, believing that EV simply equals car companies or bike companies. But the deeper, far more profitable truth is that EV revolution is actually combination of battery, power grid, and electronic ecosystems. And historically speaking, the ecosystem builders often make significantly more money than the headline players. India will adopt EVs. That is almost a certainty. But the real question is, who will actually make more money from? Because the growth stories are always easy to see. But the truly profitable stories, those are always hidden. I hope you liked this analysis. If yes, kindly subscribe and let me know what you think. I see you in the next video.